Last week we talked about renunciation and a lot of other things besides. Does anybody have any questions about any of the things that we covered last week? No?
What were they?
Yeah.
You weren't here.
I know. So I want to know what
Well, I wanted to go ahead today and address the question of renunciation and this practice.
Oh.
You know, as to whether we can describe Zen Buddhism as a renunciatory practice or not, and also whether that is of any significance. What do we gain by addressing that? So let's begin. Let's start by asking, what is renunciation? Beg your pardon?
It's dana. It's the first of the paramitas, to renunciation, to letting go of prajna paramita.
Okay, all right. And what does that look like?
The renouncing the duality of opposites.
Okay. All right.
You could also say it's renouncing the idea of there being some separate self. Yeah.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was somebody shortly before Gandhi was assassinated, had an interview with him and asked him whether he thought it was appropriate for everybody to renounce their possessions. And Gandhi thought about that for a few minutes, and he said, not so much the possessions as the possessor.
Oh, great.
So for Gandhi, the renunciation of the possessor was of far greater importance than just the possessions themselves. It seems to me that in many religious traditions, possessions play a primary part in renunciation, because the world is often thought of as a place of snares and traps for the soul. And one way to mitigate those snares and traps is to get rid of as many possessions as you can. I have a friend who now lives in Pennsylvania, but he lived here in New Mexico for a while, and he sat with us down in Albuquerque. And he would periodically go through all of his possessions and try to narrow those possessions down to just 100 items.
Wow.
And, you know, a library does not count as one.
That was what you were hoping, library one.
It's a potlatch kind of idea.
No, he was attempting to renounce everything that was everything but what was absolutely necessary for his comfort, and even then, small amount of comfort. And I watched him do this a couple of times, and it was an interesting process, because and it was surprisingly difficult to do. You know, you would think that 100 things that's a lot of things. Not at all.
Mm-mm.
But it was surprisingly easy to carry around the country. And I don't know if he's still doing it or not. I would imagine that he is. But this desire to renounce, I have seen in a number of people, including myself. I mean, how many of you have thought about renouncing things? And in what form does that take?
Mostly material.
Yeah.
Attachment to it is, I mean, you could still have it if you have no attachment.
Right. And let me ask you this. Why do you suppose that you have that feeling of renouncement?
Well, I've been cleaning up a lot and getting rid of a lot of things because I know that I might not be here that much longer and I don't want somebody else to have to do it. And
Okay.
also because there are a lot of things that I've been holding on to for a while that I have to really look at and say, do I need that? I don't want clutter in my life. I want to just, like your friend, just have what's necessary. I couldn't get it down to 100 because then I'd say, oh no, I don't have any more needles, I have to go out and buy needles. I mean, pins, you know, I'm sure I have more pins than 100.
We'll give you a dispensation for pins.
Good.
Yeah, so actually I'm in that process of really looking at something and saying, do I need this? What's the purpose of it?
Right.
For me, it's also a sense of simplicity.
Mhm.
Okay, simplicity.
Mhm.
That's a good one.
I think that some of it is built into our DNA from when we were hunter-gatherers, and a person's standing was based in part on how little they had,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
because you had to carry it all with you.
Right. Well, I think that's true even today, because in some cultures, and the one that I'm thinking of the most here is India, out of which Shakyamuni arose. Renouncement is really considered an important virtue, and it lends a lot of power and a lot of credence to the people who renounce. You know, I think this is something that Gandhi realized early on. You know, when he was in South Africa, he made some attempts to publicly renounce, and for him, that included sexual activity as well as material possessions, but nobody seemed to care in South Africa. But when he went to India and did the same thing there, it was regarded very differently and really created a lot of his political power.
Another way to look at it, however, is that India was able to support his poverty. There was this line, I can't remember where it came from, it took a ton of people to keep Gandhi in poverty, you know, because there were people around who housed him, who fed
That's
him.
right.
And in South Africa, the difficulty was no one was going to support him in his poverty.
Apparently. Well, that raises an interesting question, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, how expensive is
Poverty.
this business of spiritual renouncement? Well, I'm interested in exploring further, more deeply, this feeling of spirituality that seems to attend renouncement. Where does that come from? What's that about? Do you know what I'm getting at?
Mhm.
Well, I know, for example, that I've given Tokido to quite a few people, and I remember that when I received Tokido, that I really had an aspiration to renounce all my possessions and to try to follow the Bodhisattva vows as closely as I could. It's an extremely difficult thing to do. And it's an extremely difficult thing in this particular culture, which has practically no feeling for the word at all.
Consumerism.
Right.
Another thing that I find myself renouncing is activities, like what is actually, what I have in my life that actually makes it a good life, rather than a thrill, or, I mean, I'm not into thrills, but something that is really not necessary for my happiness,
Right.
or people around me, their happiness either. So I found that in my older life, it's different what I need to make me happy. So there's renouncing certain activities too,
Right.
or looking for those activities,
Right.
and really appreciating the simplicity.
But if we're looking at the Bodhisattva way and the vow to save all sentient beings, keeping more than one coat, as it were, is keeping another person from a coat. And then if we're saving all sentient beings, that doesn't mean absolutely renouncing what a livelihood that so you can live, but to keep access is to keep energy away from other people, and to not give that. That was the thing I wondered about the church when I was growing up, is they would talk about poverty, they would talk about sharing, they would talk, but very few people actually that I ever saw gave everything up other than what they needed. Their second house, their fifth car, except for the people that were monks, that weren't allowed to have anything.
Right.
And I remember watching Neil take his vows and give away everything he owned and lay down on the floor. And I was just like, first I thought, well, that makes sense. And then I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, everything. Like you said, your sex life, your freedom. You no longer have freedom if you're in a monastery. All your possessions, everything you own, your will, your health care, everything goes. And I was just kind of stunned that somebody would have that feeling. Is what I think you're saying, is what gives us that deep desire for renunciation?
Yes. Has anybody else felt like that?
I wouldn't give up my health care, but I think I've given up a lot of things.
Yeah, there are a couple of historical people that come to my mind when I heard Lee talk about that. One of them, of course, is St. Francis.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, here in the West, he is the great renunciator.
Mm-hmm.
Because he not only gave away all of his possessions, he gave the very clothes that he was wearing
Mm-hmm.
away and went naked into the world, as we read about
Yeah.
in the biography of St. Francis that we read recently. Another person that I have a deep feeling for and a great admiration for is Father Michael Judge. Father Michael Judge was the chaplain for the New York City Fire Department when 9/11 occurred. And he was killed by pieces of falling debris from the World Trade Center. And he is often said to have been the first person to have been killed on that day. And a number of very famous photographs of him being carried from the scene, were published in various magazines and newspapers. But more than that, he was a person who lived very much like St. Francis did. And he had a great love of music and other things, and people were constantly trying to provide him with sound systems and CDs and other things, and they simply fell from his fingers. He would immediately turn around and give everything away to somebody else. And when he died, he had virtually no possessions. Even though he was, very much loved and very much respected and cared for.
Almost all of the people we consider in some sense ascetics, John Muir, Thoreau, they all
Right.
really simplified their kit.
Right. So I find this, I find this very important, actually, and I ask the question, why do these people feel this way? How does this come about? What does this mean?
Ani's point about paring down your activities to those which you are essential. Each of these activities has devices that support it. And it occurs to me that in Muir's case, he was a botanist and he was interested in plants. That was it. So
Right.
he had his plant press and he had his notebook.
What else did he need?
He had a loaf of bread. And it gave him freedom.
Right. Freedom.
And isn't that why
Yeah,
you don't go to spiritual practice though? I mean, that's one of the, we say the vow every time. It seems if you weren't really drawn to it, you would leave. And the ultimate gift is the not even thinking, but giving your life away for someone else. Without even thinking.
Right.
And
I think in some cases you have to have, or you do have an epiphany. St. Francis had, he was quite a rebel rouser when he was young, out in the streets with his friends and, a young guy causing all kinds of situations. And then he saw his friends killed and the battles that he was in. And that's something that can change your mind about a lot of things.
Right.
And I think that maybe that was a turning point in his life when he realized a good friend to see that person slaughtered, however it was. Sometimes I think maybe you go through something that takes you really low and you feel like you need to change your life.
There's a sense of, as difficult as it seems, that there's some sort of liberation that comes from that. And something that sustains you, the sense of something that sustains you, that you need very little for that which sustains you to sustain you. Now, the closest I can come is a few years ago, I burned all of the possessions regarding my story as part of a vision quest. And it was actually in preparation for the quest that I burned all of these things. And what had come to me is that I'd say things through my life story, and I would look at them and they remind me of me. And it's funny, I have these things to remind me of me, and they're always good things, right? Oh, this is when I did this, and this is when I won this, and this. And so I was thinking, I had thought sort of all my life that at some point late in my life, say on my 80th birthday would be the time I relieve it. I get to look at one more life review, and then I toss it all. And so this is in my 40s, late 40s, that I did this. And what struck me was, do I want to hold on to all these things to remind me about my old selves? Or do I want to be more present in the here and now? And I was really scared when I burned it because it was going to be permanent. And so what happened is the day before my vision quest, I burned everything. And then the first day of my vision quest, I saved a few things, some pictures and this. First day of my vision quest, I burned all the things I had burned on that thing. I want to be fully clear. So I miss seeing some things that I would have liked to have looked at, but there is this sense of not needing anything else. That really it's I am who I am right here and right now. And I wonder, because I haven't done anything major, like I did renounce my job for a while and I was on the road for a few years with just the possessions in my car, probably more than 100 possessions in that car. But just a sense of, it seems very scary to do something that involves renouncing in a really big way. But to the degree that we do that, there is a sense of, oh, but I'm taken care of. The best example I can think of is this woman called Peace Pilgrim. Did you know about her? Her name isn't around much anymore. She's very quiet. But she gave up everything and just walked for peace for years and years and years, starting in the 60s. And she would depend on, sometimes people gave her rides, sometimes people gave her food or not. She had some very wet and cold nights. But as she started getting renowned, then it was kind of an honor to run into Peace Pilgrim, and people would start feeding her and so on. And her point was that I just trust that I'm going to be taken care of, even though there have been some dark, wet, cold nights, hungry nights, that I'm being taken care of. And I don't need anything else for that to happen. I think that's personally how one operates. Although it seems like there's a lot. It seems very scary. But for the folks who seem to do it, you don't hear many bad stories. Maybe we just don't hear them. Right? Of people who have been able to give up those things.
Right.
Gary Snyder gave up a lot, his way of life.
Yeah, that's true. We'll get to Gary Snyder
Well, it
later
seems
this
like
morning.
it's a cultural thing, though. When I spend time in Haiti, there's not that sense. Up in the mountains, the kids, they don't have toys. They make stuff out of sticks, and they give everything away when we come. All their food, anything, even though they don't have food. If a parent dies, they take in the other child. They just have this sense of that's being a part of one. So they don't have that sense that we do. It makes us who we are by the stuff we have. It gives them no power whatsoever to do that. So I don't think for them to renunciate have some kind of renunciation, it would have to be something more of a spiritual level. I mean, some of them don't even have clothes, so I mean, what can you give away? And they don't seem to have that. But if you go down to the city, where there's a lot of stuff and a lot of possessions, then you see that. I want this, and the stealing and the war and going on. So I think it has a lot to do with context and culture, and also if you see yourself, it's easier to see yourself as a whole if you're in that community up in the mountains where you depend on everybody and there's no power, no lights, nothing. Then down below where you feel like you're you and you can take care of you, or you're going to take care of you. And up there they don't have that sense. They have to depend on one another.
The weather helps.
Let me ask this question. Do you feel that renouncing possessions, renouncing the things of this world, gives you a greater access to the other world, a spiritual world?
Not necessarily. I just helped drive a U-Haul full of stuff, scary 60-year-old dolls and things. And, from, part of my son's inheritance from his mother. And it was very trippy going through that stuff, his christening gown, things that come out once a generation, the Advent calendar, things that come out once a year that really do have big juice, within that family structure, not mine, but hers. And so I think it's very contingent upon one's aspirations and one's outlook and intentions. For us, I think it's quite a different story than, say, the typical Presbyterian.
The other counter argument to that would be that when you have your survival needs met, you have more time to ponder these things. I'm thinking, I'm glad I had a frying pan and a spatula today to cook my breakfast before I came. It would have been a much different day. I probably wouldn't be here because I have a car that I needed to drive to be here, unless I decided to walk the 10 miles or whatever it is. So I think I think not necessarily is the best answer. Sure, it helps to renounce things, but also not necessarily.
A lot of people aren't into renunciation. They like their stuff.
That's the thing that I think is useful to renounce. But just the sense of having things doesn't necessarily, I don't think, tie you to them. It's if you're tied to them. And maybe I'm tied to my fry pan and my spatula and my plate that I used. I'm really glad I had those things this morning. And there's part of, I'm sort of speaking on both sides, because having lived in Africa and experiencing that, there is that primitive spirituality that it's not talked about, which seems very much more Zen than the sort of higher thinking kinds of things. But I think there's also a way in society when we have things and we have that survival stuff that we can then write and so on, and do these other things that we wouldn't be able to if our survival needs weren't so immediately met.
And it
Well-
has motive too. I mean, people that collect
Yeah.
great works of art and house them and protect them
Yeah.
are serving a cultural gift for all the rest of us.
Well, I think that things, what George Carlin calls stuff,
Yeah, sentimental, that topic is.
I think that they have different meanings. I'm thinking of the moment, for example, of a knife that I own now. It belonged to my grandmother, and it was her paring knife. And she was quite a cook. She was a farmer in Oklahoma, and it has a rosewood handle on it. It's just a very simple knife. There's nothing special about this at all.
Sure easy to use.
But it has a particular meaning to me that is very important, and certainly I would find difficult ascribing to the stuff that's coming out of China right now that occupies so many kitchen drawers. And if I were to shave all my belongings down to 100, I'm sure I would have to include that one as one. So things, I think, have different meanings for different reasons. And a lot of it has to do with their history and has to do with their usage and that sort of thing. Do you think that the practice of Buddhism is renunciatory? Is this a practice of renunciation?
Absolutely.
Why?
Renouncing the self.
Yeah.
Well, I was going through all the things that I have renounced since I took up this practice, and I have to say that I've renounced quite a bit. You know, for one thing, I basically renounced my profession because I found that more and more of my time was spent, you know, doing Dharma talks and koan study and all of the things that I've been engaged in. And I remember reading a book, I think it was by Charles Wright, back in around 2000, and he said that anybody in American Zen who makes who begins as a neophyte and ends up as a sensei in Zen practice, he estimated that the cost of that in terms of, you know, in terms of robes and session fees and dana and lost income and all the various things that you spend in doing that, at that time, around the year 2000, was $500,000 or something like that. I'm sure that today that's probably a great deal more than that.
Such an expensive practice.
Still cheaper than skiing.
But the other thing is that, you know, I think that every time you sit down on your cushion, you are renouncing yourself.
To your way of thinking, does renunciation have a negative or positive or connotation?
No, I don't. I regard renunciation as a giving up of something that I formerly admired or wanted or felt I needed, but it's a recognition of its, what's the word? It's not needed. It's something that I can do without. And it's something that I gladly do without so that I may do something else.
Mm-hmm. So it's a shedding.
Yeah, shedding. Shedding. Like a cicada. Or a spider. Well, does anybody have any other questions about this topic? I think it's an interesting topic. It's particularly in this culture, which, as I pointed out last week, really doesn't even bother to discuss it.
So you had said at the beginning you wanted to talk about this, and why might it be important to talk about? I'm curious about that second piece that you were going to offer.
Well, I think it's important to talk about it in order to see the difference between